Got a special Roundtable podcast for you here today. We got all the brightest minds in college baseball. We got Kendall Rogers, we got Chris Burke, we got Mike Rooney, we got Kyle Peterson, and of course, I'm Aaron Fitt. It's great to be with you guys. We're just going to riff today about some of the hot topics in college baseball. Gentlemen, how are you guys holding up during lockdown? Everybody staying safe, staying sane?
Yeah, I'll give it a golf clap just like Runes. We're good. Thanks for asking.
All good, man. All good.
I want to know, by the time this is over, if Berkey's actually going to be able to beat Kyle on the golf course. That's the big question.
Ooh, he has before.
Well, you might want to check in on our last round, Fitt, but we can get to that later.
But it's a good point, Fitzy, because Berkey is very intimidated by KP on the golf course. It's kind of a mental thing. Their games match up well enough, but KP's mental game overwhelms Berkey. If I could provide some commentary.
I appreciate your feedback, Mike.
Just
I feel
trying
like
to
the competition here involves Berkey between KP and Berkey on the golf course and Berkey and Aaron on Tom Brady versus Peyton Manning.
Well, Berkey's my golf coach, so I gotta suck up.
There you go, Fitzy. So careful. I like how you didn't jump in on that fake news by Rooney there. So well done.
Well,
I feel like Runes does get the wardrobe award today for his Eagles bucket hat. I have to admit.
Great.
Champions.
Yeah.
I'm not going to provide the debate there, Runes. 6 rings will do the talking. You can have your Eagles bucket hat. But guys, let's talk some college baseball. Obviously, this was a weird spring. When you think back about the 4 weeks that we had some good things happen. But that let's go back to that week before we get started here on some of the big issues going forward. But how did you guys react to that frustrating week when everything happened so quickly and wound up having no season at all?
I'll go first. So I was going to Gainesville that day, and I had Florida, Georgia that weekend. So would have been Thursday morning, was going to watch Florida practice, then Georgia practice that night, then sit and watch Hancock and Tommy Mace the next night. At 11, I landed in Atlanta about 10:30. At 11:30, everything really started going nuts. The only basketball game in the country was Creighton playing St. John's in the Big East tournament. So I sat and watched that, figuring out whether to go to Gainesville. Matt Sanduli, who oversees our college baseball, said, hey, it's probably a better idea for you to go home. Got on the plane, got home, probably 6:30 that night. By the time I went to bed, the College World Series was off. So I left that morning thinking I was going to go see 2 teams practice. And when I went to bed that night, the whole season was done. It was an interesting day.
What about you, Berkey?
Were you traveling that weekend, Berkey?
Well, I had just gotten back from doing Georgia Tech and Auburn, which was a pretty interesting game. I actually liked what I saw from Georgia Tech. They had some pieces that I was curious to see how they were going to unfold throughout the course of the season. Kind of some new blood there with new members of the coaching staff there for Georgia Tech, and Auburn, who had really had kind of a flawless run other than, getting swept at home by Central Florida, which had kind of a weird feel to it as well. And so I'd left there with, pretty good impression of both those clubs, and we're fired up to see the start of the SEC season. And kind of like KP, obviously we all got hit with a whirlwind there, and the whole country, the whole world really got hit with a new normal. But I was actually supposed to be home that weekend. So that first weekend wasn't as weird for me as the second weekend. And that's kind of where it hit me, where I was supposed to have Tennessee hosting Vanderbilt. And that was going to be a really cool series. So that one was the one that when it came up on my calendar, that kind of the reality of no college baseball really sunk in that weekend for me.
Man, I would say for me, I was like Berkey off that weekend, but then getting ready, like all of us, to just have the next 3.5 months of your life were just slammed in an awesome way. I had a midweek game at UNC the next week, and what was going to be cool is I was going to do an interview with Joey Lancelotti, who is a Philly kid and was having a great year. And of course, we're going to talk Eagles. He went to one of my rival high schools. We're going to talk about the greatness of Malvern Preparatory School for Boys. Even though he did take us down twice his senior year, I came to find out that was a buzzkill. But Yeah, and I remember hearing about the NBA thing, and then it felt like next thing you know, they canceled the College World Series. And quite honestly, I was really upset. Like, man, why are we canceling something in late June in like 5 seconds? And then, of course, we know what we know now. But man, it was, the word you hear all the time is surreal. It was just felt like an out of body experience almost.
No, I felt that way too. And Kyle, kind of bring you in here on this topic. We've talked so much over the last couple of weeks about the way this has all affected college baseball from kind of a team, coach, scout standpoint. Like, what's kind of been the reaction around Omaha in terms of just not having the College World Series or the swim trials this year? I mean, obviously that's a huge hit for that community. What's been the kind of the response around there?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the list of things. So it was, and I know every community has some of these things, but the Berkshire Hathaway, their shareholder meeting is always a huge thing. I mean, people come in from around the world. That's canceled. College World Series is canceled. The draft was supposed to be here this year. Obviously, we're still waiting on a date for the draft, but it's not going to be in Omaha. And then the swim trials, thankfully, I mean, essentially all of it comes back next year. We'll see about the draft, but the rest of it should be back. They're just announcing, I think, swim trials dates later on this week. So it's, man, I think that we're all, I mean, there was first an initial just shock of what was going on in the world. And then now we're all going through that economic shock of this is what it really means. But thankfully, the city is, I would say, as prepared as any could be to go through something like this. So it stinks, but everybody understands it's the only option we have right now. And I have a feeling that our sport is going to be pretty popular come next year.
Yeah.
Well said.
And we might be looking at it's kind of crazy because it stinks for a lot of players and a lot of coaches that there's going to be, I think inevitably going to be a major roster crunch. But on the other side, we might be looking at a major influx of talent here. I mean, in a way, once we get through the painful process of deciding where everybody winds up, we might find ourselves in something of a golden age for college baseball. I mean, am I crazy to say that, guys?
Spot on.
I don't think so.
Go ahead, Burke. You go first.
No, I'd love to hear what you had to say, Runes. I was just going to say, obviously there's a bunch that still has to be sorted out with this deal, and I'm very curious to see how many schools have a legit open arms policy. I think we're still trying to figure that out, but I was reading your article, Aaron. You did as good a job as you could possibly do with a topic that's pretty hard to completely wrap your arms around. But that being said, I think no matter where you go to do the math or how you try to figure out the numbers, there is going to be way more players, number one, returning to college baseball than we would have had, and number two, entering into college baseball than we would have had. So, I think there's a chance that the next 4 or 5 years, we might see kids that would have never shown up to campus or kids that would have never gotten a redo, basically. And who's to say, that a kid doesn't make a giant jump from 22 to 23 when they come back to college baseball. So it's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, and I would piggyback on that, guys, that, not fair to speak for Commissioner Manfred, but I will. He clearly wants to make college baseball the first part of the minor league development program. And I think if I'm him as a businessman, he's looking at it like, why are we paying for lower level minor leagues twice? We got this great development system in college. And this, the coronavirus, this pandemic just became, they want a shorter draft. This just became the thing that put it in. And I agree with Berkey's points. I mean, from a talent standpoint, it's got a chance to be a golden age in college baseball where you'll have less junior signing, more high school players coming in. It's, I think the talent level's got a chance to get exceptional, and it's already really good.
Yeah. Runes, you're the one guy out of this group that's actually kind of been in the war room at a college baseball program and had to kind of figure out scholarship situation, who's getting what. What would be your approach from your experience in the war room as to how you would kind of adjust things? D1 Council is going to go adjust kind of the roster management of college baseball. What would be kind of your best case scenario as somebody who's actually had to deal with the numbers before?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what seat you're sitting in. I think if I was a mid-major right now, and let's assume that the one-time transfer is going to pass, that's another topic in all of this. if I was a mid-major, I would save some bullets for really good players that don't make it in a big program. Like, just full disclosure, we at Arizona State, we sent Ian Kinsler out to Missouri. I mean, I think he has 50 WAR in the big leagues. That was a pretty good player, right? Taylor Holiday, we sent out. He went to UC Irvine, was captain of an Omaha team. There are really good players that are just not going to be able to get in the mix in big programs. So if I'm mid-major, I'm saving some bullets. I think if I'm a big-time program, I still am, like, you want that 6 to 10 round player. I think more of those kids probably start coming to school, and that really has a lot to do with signability. But I think you're going to keep good players. You're going to have juniors that just aren't want to go out for 20 grand. Think about it. If you're playing an SEC school, I mean, we're going to see Jake Mangum over and over again. Like, man, 20 grand and leave Starkville for the life I have here. Yeah, I'm good. I think I'm going to stick around and be the mayor of this town for another year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's gonna be very, very hard to get a junior to sign for $20,000. A senior, it might happen, but a junior, I just don't see it.
There are juniors who go out every year and sign for 100 or 50. I mean, there are guys that just want to go play, and there will still be guys like that, especially if they're looking at next year's draft and they're seeing, next year's draft's going to be really loaded. If we go to 5 this year, next year is going to be a bumper crop. And so some of those guys might say, why should I come back and just get a year older and have my value reduced? I'm still not going to have that much leverage because I'm going to be a year older. But
I think maybe just as much as that, Aaron, is how many of these kids' families have been economically impacted, and they returning to school, even if it's 50, 60% of a scholarship, is no longer an option.
Yeah.
They don't want to sign for 20 grand, but they also don't want to take $30,000, $40,000 in loans out either. And so off they go, And the flip side of that is, I was making the point a little bit earlier, but it just kind of stuck in my mind. I know we make a big deal about age, and I know that front offices have never been more concerned about age, right or wrong. But you look at what Brent Rooker did for his career by coming back as a redshirt junior and went from being a good college player to, an all-time SEC great and what was he, a sandwich pick?
I think he was wins.
Yeah, so the opportunity for a kid to come back a year bigger, stronger, wiser, and make a big jump will be interesting. But I do think the economic piece of what this coronavirus has done to our country will play into some kids' decisions on whether they come back or not.
I'll be interested.
Go ahead, Kyle.
The one thing that I'll be interested to see is if you're the high school kid that was maybe going to be a 6th rounder this year, and you were potentially that was a number that was going to make sense for you to sign, and you were going to a 4-year school, how many of those kids end up going to junior college? Because, do you want to enter a system when you're looking at it going, hey, I was probably going to go anyway? I do think you're going to see a high-level JUCO influx at the same time of some kids that were maybe the fringy, going to sign, not going to sign, but you're not going to go in the top 5 rounds. And I'm definitely not going to sign for 20 grand. But I will go to Chipola, or I will go to St. Jack, and I'll, for a year, see exactly what it looks like. And then potentially if they want to go play Division I, they still can. But it gives them more draft leverage next year. The draft this year is going to be fascinating. The draft next year is going to be crazy.
Crazy.
Yeah.
You are going to have, I think you're going to have more junior college kids because more kids are going to end up at JUCO. Obviously, you're going to have not fully 2 years of 4-year college, but pretty close. Well, 2.5. You're going to have this year's sophomore class, this year's juniors class, and this year's seniors class, absent the first 5 rounds, and some are going to sign for the $20,000 number, especially if you're a senior. I've talked to a few coaches, and they said, we could have had 7 or 8 seniors coming back. I think I'm probably going to have 2 or 3. So I think an assumption that just every senior is going to come back and not sign isn't accurate, but clearly some are, and that's going to massively affect the roster. But the ones I'm looking at that usually don't make that move are the fringy draft guys aren't going to go. How many of them end up going to junior college instead of going to name your 4-year school?
The other thing you'll see, KP, I think, is I saw a headline. I think a kid, Dylan Leach, is going to Arkansas a year early. The Robert Moore, #Bob Moore ball player. Those kids going to college a year earlier, so they kind of diffuse that age thing being held against them. But, you know, and Leach in his quote even mentioned, like, hey, that 2021 draft, which I would have been in, that's it's a pretty crowded dance floor right now.
Yeah.
I heard something interesting from Paul Maneri the other day, which was, you know, he doesn't understand why you look at major league clubs, look at these guys as a 22-year-old man, and all of a sudden you're an old man. You know, I mean, is there that much of a difference? I don't really understand the obsession with age, and I know there's been stories about this. Maybe I need to read those, but I mean, like Burke said with that Rooker example, I mean, guys can still take big steps forward, and you see that in pro ball. I mean, you're not done developing even physically until you're in your mid to late 20s. I don't get it. I don't get the obsession with, I got to get the 21-year-old. If he comes back to 22, he's a has-been. I mean, give me a break. That's stupid.
Yeah. No, and the truth is, I mean, most in the sport of baseball where your fast twitch isn't as important. I mean, let's be honest. How many guys make a living beating out balls to, ground balls to first or stealing bases? That's really not the game, right? So your prime in baseball is 26 to 33, 34. So who cares if you get to the big leagues at 25, 26? I remember playing with a guy named Luke Scott who really didn't, I think he went 5 years to college. Remember, went to Oklahoma State and really didn't become a good big leaguer until he was like 28 or 9, but had like 6 or 7 good years. That's a heck of a career, I mean, I understand in the post-steroid world that careers are shorter, especially pitchers in their 30s become much more fragile. In the post-steroid world, that's just true. But position players, I don't think it's as big a deal as these teams make it out to be, for sure. I'll bring up another point as we were talking about the draft next year. Guys, I'm not so sure next year's draft is going to be quote unquote normal economically. I'm not sure what normal is. So if kids think, I'll go back and next year I'll get $8 million for going in the first round, I just don't. Well, we don't know what normal is going to look like. It's certainly going to be better than this year, but it's going to be interesting to see what the new normal really economically for America in general is. Specifically, though, if the season really takes a hit this year, what normal is going to look like is going to be pretty interesting.
I do think, though, to that draft point next year, I mean, the biggest difference is just number of rounds, right? So if you have, I think we're done with the days of 40-round drafts, and I think that makes all the sense in the world. I think it was too many rounds anyway. So is it somewhere between 20, 25 probably? Yeah. But I mean, if you look at what the slotting system was this year, and I don't have it up right now, but what was your slot for the first pick in the 6th round as opposed to 20,000 this year? Now, does your slot system? Okay, so that's a $280,000 difference for that kid, assuming they were going to get slot. That's where I think the difference is in this, is ultimately those guys. Now, does your slotting system look different next year because the draft is obviously getting reorganized from a number standpoint? It's probably going to get reorganized from a monetary standpoint as well. But I think that's where the decisions need to be made this year, because that's a $250,000 decision. Now, is there any guarantees? No. You're entering a draft class that theoretically has twice as many guys in it than it did before. So if you were a fringe 5th, 6th rounder this year, does that mean you're a fringe 9th rounder next year? I don't know. But it definitely doesn't mean that you're going to come back and automatically be in the same spot. I think it's fascinating.
It is.
I just hope the kids are taken care of. I know that.
The big difference, I think, is –
will be crazy.
Yeah, and if we go from 5 rounds this year and the minimum next year is 20 rounds, that to me is the biggest difference. And also, as I understand it, I don't know if the undrafted cap would still apply next year, but at least
it does.
Okay, but in that 10 to 20 round range, you can still get the 125 max without it counting against your bonus. So I mean, that's not.
But that's the question, Fitzy. It's like our teams, to Berkey's point earlier, our team's going to pay the 125. I mean, they used to give the 125 out like candy.
Yeah.
And like, is that going to be the case in future years? The other thing is, what about the MLB scholarship fund? Is that going to, how's that going to be impacted by all this?
The scholarship fund, I don't know what the number was. I know what the number was when I was in college, and it was somewhere between 12 and 15% of that money ever got used. So I would hope that the scholarship fund component of it doesn't go anywhere. To the other, I think you're going to see it legislated. And it's because if you're in a tighter crunch than somebody else, who's to say that, I mean, name your big market team, wherever they are, doesn't become the 125 king of the world next year. And take, I mean, you could take a somewhat similar approach that the Mets did last year. Like, we're going to load up on our first 3 or 4. We're going to take college seniors for the next 7 rounds. And then we're going to pay another 30 guys $125,000, because those are the guys that we think we're going to find 2 to 3 big leaguers out of whatever that group is. I would be surprised, and I haven't seen the 2021 draft explained in great detail in what they were doing through the CBA, but I would assume that there's some more financial shackles that are in addition to the 10th round than there was before.
Well, the whole purpose of this is because the commissioner wants, I guess baseball in general, all the owners, they want to save money in the draft. I mean, that's the whole reason they're doing this. You don't have to go to 5 rounds to save yourself, an average of $2 million per club, or 2.5. That's still not that much money. Even in a crisis, that's not that much money when you're a $1 billion enterprise. The reason they're doing this is because they want to. They're plain and simple. And so I think that signals the direction that the draft is going to head in the future.
Yeah, I think
guys,
what's the direction the MLB wants to head overall, and kind of goes back to making college kind of the primary, output source, and trimming down those minor league minor league teams.
I do think, KR, though, that's what we're gonna have to be. We're gonna have to be creative in college baseball, because clearly, if we speak for MLB, they want college baseball to be the first development program, right? Yeah. And let's assume they're going to trim up the minor leagues, so there's not going to be as many opportunities for players. Like, you're going to have to be a better player in college to then progress to the minor leagues. Here's where I'm concerned for our sport is that if I'm an owner, does the 11.7 start and less money in the draft, less opportunity, does that start to influence the elite athletes from playing baseball? Now, I think Kyle's had some great ideas on how MLB could maybe help the scholarship situation in college baseball. I don't know logistically how we pull that off, but that's the one concern in all this. Our sport has done such a great job from a development standpoint. We have literally better facilities in the minor leagues at the highest levels. The coaching is outstanding, but the 11.7 is still a scary number when football and basketball, everybody gets a full ride.
Guys, are you hearing anything, or what are you hearing, or what's your gut on this roster deal and potential scholarship increases, at least for next season?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the council hasn't really come out with a framework. I mean, obviously, I think they're going to get rid of the 27-man counter, the 35-man roster. I think they're going to have to be extremely flexible with that. And honestly, Berkey, I think they're not only going to have to be flexible with that next year, they're going to have to be flexible with that for 2 or 3 years down the road as well. The scholarship thing is the other interesting thing. I mean, they got the seniors right now, but, you're seeing some conferences out there who aren't going to let their teams pay seniors, or having schools that say they're not going to pay seniors. So that's, for me, even beyond the roster, the scholarship stuff is what I'm really intrigued to see, because I look at this situation as college baseball. The sport makes the second most money of any NCAA championship sport behind men's basketball. And yet we get very few opportunities to actually make some pretty big changes in the sport. And I kind of feel like if you're college baseball in this situation, in a way it's taking advantage of, the crisis at hand. But if you're college baseball here, and you kind of have that door cracked open, I think it's very important for whether it's coaches, administrators that support baseball, or the ABCA, or whoever, to find a way to get a lot more for college baseball, because it's very difficult, guys. If you're the NCAA and the NCAA, changes some scholarship structure or roster structure, it's very hard once you put that in place to take that away, because eventually that becomes your system. So it's just really hard to take that away. The one thing I have heard, and I'll kind of get everyone's take on this, but the one thing I have heard discussed is the 35.1 model. I believe Aaron had this in his column the other day as well. But it's essentially over 3 years, you can spend you can give out 35.1 scholarships, 11.7 3 years. You can do it whenever you want. So in year one, you could give out 18 if you want. But guess what? That's 18 less than you have to spend the next 2 years. I'm kind of curious to get everyone's thoughts on that particular model. That is a model that has been brought up with a couple of people influential in the sport.
Rooney, do you want to take that one first? Because you've got years of trying to figure out who's on
Yeah.
a quarter and who's on a half.
Boy, that is interesting. I would say, I think the first thing we got to do in baseball is get rid of the 25% rule, just to give coaches the most flexibility to help the most families. I think that helps this situation a little bit. I always think of the example of you've got a family that's fairly affluent and you got a family that's really going to have to scrap to put together the money for college. And I got to give both families 25%. Makes no sense. Family number one, if I put them on 1%, they get that thrill of being a scholarship athlete. It's a big deal to a lot of kids and families, but the money's not really the issue. And I can give 49% to the other families. So I think the freedom around that, I think giving it multi-years of flexibility, I'll tell you why I'm in favor of it. I think the more we give schools and coaches autonomy, the better solutions we get to. And I think in this situation with the seniors, here's something that we're seeing. Athletic directors don't have unlimited funds, and they're having to kind of evaluate what are our priority sports. And there are some schools where baseball is going to be in good stead there, where, an AD might say, hey, I got about $300,000 for seniors. All of my seniors are going to need about $500,000. So what are the sports that are really important to us? So to that point, KR, like anything that gives baseball a little bit more autonomy, a little bit more flexibility, I'm in favor of. Logistically, I could see the 35.1 being a little hairy, but I'm for anything that creates a little bit more freedom.
Well, here's the other thing too, guys. And this is just an example. This is just from talking to coaches in different parts of the country, and I'm just using Texas and A&M because I'm a Texas State homer. But
you are from Texas? That's for sure?
Do what now?
You are from Texas?
Yes, I am.
Okay, gotcha. Clarifying.
But if you look let's take the state of Texas, for example. A lot of kids in the state grew up wanting to go to Texas A&M or Texas. Some kids in the state grew up and, like you said, they're pretty affluent. They don't need to. Their parents don't need to pay, a majority of their college. The parents can pay a majority of their college. So let's say a kid can go to Texas or Texas A&M or Arizona State, and they're willing to take 3%. In a partial scholarship sport, I don't understand the argument against allowing kids to do that if they want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just say,
the mid majors are against it because they think that more kids will just go into power schools. But I would argue, guys, and you guys may totally disagree with me here, but I would argue the mid majors now are in a much, much better spot than they were back whenever this rule was not in place. I think when you look at the coastals, the facilities, you look at the Louisianas, you look at these Sun Belt type of schools that I would consider kind of that upper mid-major, they're in a totally different situation. A kid is not going to leave Coastal to be, as the number 2 or number 3 starter to be the Sunday guy at South Carolina. Like, I just don't believe that's going to happen now.
Yeah.
I would disagree with that for this reason. Every big-time coach I talk to wants that rule, and I think they all want that rule for mostly good reasons, but I think I would have a hard time believing that doesn't hurt mid-majors. There's no way Sam Houston State isn't hurt if Texas A&M can't offer dudes 1% and 5% and 8%. Like, there's going to be kids that are going to want to go to – now, there might be more transfers because once they get there, they realize maybe this wasn't the best idea. But if you offer a kid – if you weren't going to offer a kid 25% because of the current rule, but you could offer him 10%, and the kid's going to go, I can get 40% to Sam Houston State or 10% to Texas A&M, most kids are going to go to Texas A&M, at least to start. I believe that to be true. So I do think it would hurt the mid-majors, but I'm not saying that's bad for our sport, and I'm also not saying that I disagree with you. But if from a standpoint of giving coaches freedom, I think that's good in general, but I do think it would hurt the mid-majors personally.
But just remember, Burke, we got 3 rules doing the same thing. We got APR that prevents over-recruiting to a degree. We've got, I think the rule that we need to keep is not the 25%, it's the 27 men on scholarship. That's the rule that prevents, again, full disclosure, back in the day at Arizona State, we probably had 20 kids a year.
875 people on scholarship? Okay.
Yeah, no. Well, then we went to a small model, but hey, try and create team chemistry with 75 dudes. That's a real treat.
Yeah, 3 dudes to a locker.
Yeah, but think about it. You can only have 27 men on scholarship, so you can't load up a roster. the big schools all the time. Think about it. If you got 27 kids
No, I'm
on
with
varsity,
that. I like that. 27
I like
men
that
on
rule
scholarship,
too.
but you can distribute them however you want. I like that rule. I'm with you on that rule.
Kyle, you were saying earlier?
Listen, I think if you have roster limits, the difference right now as opposed to what it used to be, to where, name your power school could go give 15 kids books and they were going to sign because they grew up wanting to play there. The difference right now is roster limits too. And if you have roster limits attached to it, it limits the amount that you can do it. So if the bucket is the same, it's just allocated differently, and Jimmy's getting 1% and Johnny's getting 49 instead of 25 and 25. The reality is I don't know if it affects where kids go that much if you have a roster limit in place, because you can't go sign 20 kids to books. If you could, then I would be more concerned about it than I am right now, because there's an overall ceiling attached to it that's going to keep it down anyway.
I know
I agree with that.
There are coaches that hate the 35-man limit, and Mike Fox had actually a pretty passionate point about this in my story the other day, and that was, he doesn't think we should be restricting the amount of opportunities for walk-ons. He thinks it's good for these kids to have chances to play, and he said, if they had that rule, that 35-man cap in 1977, you wouldn't be talking to me because I was a walk-on. And I'm sensitive to that, but I also feel like that 35-man thing, I mean, it does help parity. Now, whether or not parity is a good thing, Burke, you made up that.
Right.
I don't know if that is. I like parity, but I mean, there's a space, I think, where you're doing what's best for the programs that drive revenue in college baseball, but also promoting some degree of parity. How do you guys come down on the 35-man rule overall?
I'm trying to think of what it was. Did we have one when we played? I feel like there was there nothing, because I know we had more than 40 in the clubhouse. Maybe it can be a little bit more, but I'm okay with a cap number. I think that the idea of that it spreads a little bit of it out, I don't have a general issue with. Should it be a few more? Maybe, but I'm okay with a cap number.
Because let's be honest, the number doesn't come into play until like the third week of February. So you could carry 50 kids until you have to make that decision. Correct, Runes? You don't have to make that number until before you start playing games, right?
There's several programs that have big fall rosters, 50 kids, something like that. You don't have to be at 35 until the spring. And I would. So
you don't have to.
Go ahead.
I guess what I'm saying is, to Mike's point, like, come on. Like, you might not make it, but you can come. So I don't really see a lot in that point, because there is nothing limiting how many quote unquote walk-ons you invite to campus every fall. They can practice, they can work out, they can train all the way. You get to see them from August through February until you have to make that decision. Then you get 8. And the kids that don't even make that number, they can still stay at school and try again the next year. So, I mean, to me, I don't see a great case for increasing 35 personally.
Yeah, I would say if we get the one-time transfer rule back, that changes that a little bit. That's what I don't like about a 50-man roster right now is if you don't make it, you're you're going to junior college whether you like it or not, whether that's the right academic fit for you or not. If we do a one-time transfer back in place, I think that then I'm more agnostic on it. And I think, guys, that's the next question. Like, my thought on the one-time transfer, like we talked about earlier, I think that's going to really help mid-majors. I think I hear a lot of mid-major coaches are worried about poaching, but as someone who may or may not have been on the poacher side of poaching, it's not that easy.
Arizona State never poached.
And I think the mid-majors get better players kind of matriculating down the system than your best player goes to the Cape. And
I totally agree.
So
I agree with that too.
Mentioning, guys, we can go into this discussion, but it's worth mentioning. I saw a report yesterday from Jeff Goodman. He's a basketball writer, but he talked to somebody, John Steinbrecher, on the D1 Council, the MAC commissioner. And Steinbrecher said the committee will be discussing the one-time transfer rule either late this month or early in May, and potentially will vote on it. So if that goes into place immediately, just thoughts from the gang here. I think everybody kind of knows where I sit. I've been pretty vocal about one time transfer rule for a few years now, but what's everybody else's take on it?
I'm all in on it. I think that when you look at anything, whatever business you're in right now, and clearly from a college baseball standpoint, it gives us a point to push the reset button a little bit and say, okay, what are some things that just have made sense that for logistical reasons or bureaucratic reasons haven't got through? And in a non-full scholarship sport, I think it's unfair to kids to not allow them to transfer once. Now, I think once is enough. I don't think you need the ability to bounce 3 or 4 different times, but once is I think is a good solution to, a sport that has some challenges just based on what the overall roster sizes are.
I 100% agree with that. I think it's a no-brainer. I also agree with the thought that there'll be more big-time players transferring, or big-time program transferring maybe down a notch than there will be mid-major kids transferring up a notch. And there'll also be kids from NAIA and I guess NAIA doesn't matter, but D3 and D2 that will pop. I know there's a kid here at Bellarmine University that if there was a one-time transfer rule would be pitching for U of L or U of K for sure.
Brandon Fitt, our boy.
Brandon Fitt, yeah. Brandon Fitt, who's got he would have been pitching at U of L or U of K for sure. So that'll be interesting to see some kids that jump up a division, not just a level of from mid-major to a Power 5. So I think it's a no-brainer. We got to give kids freedom again, 100%, especially in the non-fully funded sports.
Well, here's the thing for the mid-majors too, guys, is I think about it now. Like if you are out of the mix at a big school and you're going to leave there, it's a mutual decision to leave. You got to go to junior college. It's the only choice you have. So then think about it. If I'm a mid-major, what happens is, Chris Burke just couldn't get in the mix at Tennessee. He has to go to junior college. One of two things happens. Chris Burke goes to junior college and dominates, and so he's right back at Tennessee version 2.0. Or he really struggles at junior college, and the big schools back off because Berkey got found out, and then he ends up at a mid-major. So you're as the mid-major, you're kind of screwed both ways. Whereas now, if you're the mid-major and Berkey leaves Tennessee, because he was disenchanted, the football program can't win any games, he's not enjoying his experience, etc. So now you got a chance to take a chance on that kid and get a really good player, as opposed to having to hope a big school doesn't pick him off in junior college.
Fortunately, we won the national championship my freshman year, Roon, so that wasn't the case. I'm not sure if you ever heard of T. Martin. I'm not sure if you ever heard of T. Martin, but
yeah.
We
couldn't do, right?
That's right.
Oh man.
No, he had a much harder time with Florida than he did with the Patriots. It's just a weird deal.
That was his Peerless Prize too, right? Was on that team.
Yeah, Al Wilson, kind of a good player. No, I think you're right. The mid majors are in a better spot. They can be the immediate fallback plan for a kid that wants to transfer out. Here's one last thing I'll say, guys, on this whole deal, kind of the big picture thing we're talking about. And somebody mentioned it earlier. I really think we're in a scenario here where the rich are going to get richer. And I can't really bemoan that, because if you care about college baseball, you are in a position to really set your program up to be in a very good spot. I was talking to a kid the other day, a senior pitcher for Louisville. Are you coming back? Well, I don't know what's going to happen, so I say this with zero internal knowledge, but something tells me if he wants to come back, his money will be available to him, because Louisville has made it clear year after year after year they care about baseball. They're all going to figure that out, right? Some places, that's probably not the case. And so I do think the programs, and that's fine with me. I mean, if you love college baseball and your administration is committed to it and you want to bring kids back, then good for you. And I think the piece with this deal is interesting, guys, is everybody was on the precipice of winning the national championship. Like, you know what I mean? Like, everybody was still kind of in the honeymoon phase. You see what I'm saying?
It's the end of spring training. It's the end of spring training.
It was the end of spring training. Nothing really ugly had happened yet to any of the contenders. And so all of those seniors and juniors all felt like they were going to Omaha, and they all felt like they were going to win the national championship. And so I think there's still very much a warm and fuzzy feeling back for a lot of those kids to come back and give it another try. And we're talking about the teams that are in that mix. We'll probably welcome all those teams back, and they're going to figure out a way still to bring in their biggest recruits and make the money work. So I think there's a chance that this deal will be great for college baseball in a lot of the higher levels, and the rich are going to get richer on this deal.
It's really, yeah, it's Berkey. It's really interesting. I was just talking to a couple of administrators yesterday, and there were rumors going around the Big Ten, the Pac-12, and the ACC were not going to allow schools to pay seniors. But I saw that Oregon State, Scott Barnes came out saying they're going to pay all their seniors with donor money. Ohio State and Penn State are committed to doing out of the Big Ten. Now, I haven't heard anything on the ACC, but at least sounds like the Big Ten and the Pac-12 are going to at least give the option for the schools to pay the returning seniors. And my guess here is if Ohio State and Penn State are going to do it, everybody's probably going to do it for the most part. So that's a good development.
Well, just there, I'd be shocked if Adam Elliott and Luke Smith want to come back. Something tells me they can come back.
Yeah.
You know?
Hey, I got a question for the group on. So let's just play out some scenarios here. So, you know, obviously the economics of this pandemic are far-reaching, and you know, there's a lot of college administrators. You know, you've heard some rumors of schools, coaches being told, "Hey, whatever your budget was this year, let's prepare a budget for next year that's 80% of that. Let's see what that looks like." So my question is, in college baseball, do we just stick with 56 games starting when we're starting? Do we just kind of draw a line in the sand? If you can do it, you can do it. If you can't, you can't. Because you certainly don't want to stunt the growth of the schools that really love college baseball.
Well,
but at the same time, do we look at, hey, maybe we consider up games? We just eliminate the first weekend in February and kick back just 1 week. We eliminate some midweek games. I kind of feel like we play too many midweek games personally, but that's just my opinion. I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts on that? Like the economics of this thing?
So real quick, I'll jump in here because I was talking to a Big Ten coach yesterday. There's been a couple of Big Ten coaches propose actually, well, assuming that football season isn't played without fans, which, I mean, at this point, I mean, who knows what's going to happen. But, I mean, it's as good as bet as any that we won't have fans at football games for a while this fall. Let's say that doesn't happen, and these athletic departments are cutting funds and things like that. You know, his pitch was, let's just play conference games. Like, if we're looking for ways to save money, let's chop off the first 3 weeks and get rid of all that travel budget and just play go into straight conference games. So the Big Ten, for instance, would start in mid-March with conference play, and that's all they would do. So that was one, you know, train of thought from a coach out of the Big Ten.
That's pretty extreme.
Yeah, I thought it was too. I mean, I wouldn't be cool with that. But, I mean, his pitch was, you know, if it allows some of these conferences not to have to cut baseball programs, then, you know, desperate times call for desperate measures, as they say.
Fair enough. But you got to let those schools at least fly to Florida for a weekend and play some games. You know, somebody got to play some games before the middle of March. I mean, and some of those schools can't just play indoors. I mean, they can throw bullpens and take BP. I mean, I guess if everybody's in the same boat, everybody's in the same boat. But I definitely don't like that rule.
Well, I mean,
or that plan, I should say.
Everybody's never in the same boat, because if you live in this area of the country and you're anywhere north, I mean, it's whenever the season starts, it's still going to be tougher on you. I would, just as an overall statement, I would just say that you know, I would be floored if it looks the same next year. There's an economic reality and a massive economic uncertainty. Yeah. But the one thing that is an absolute is athletic departments are not going to be in the same financial position come January 1st of 2021 that they were January 1st of this year. They can't be. And so I think it's unrealistic to look at it and say we can't, you know, well, we got to keep everything the same. No, it doesn't need to be, you know, we're going to do this in perpetuity. But I think that we all need to have some understanding that flexibility is necessary next year.
Yeah, I was talking to a couple of coaches yesterday because this discussion point in Aaron's column the other day about the valuation of the college baseball player, like how much is the school making on these players, and like how does that go in the decision-making process for cutting programs? And there's some smaller schools and a lot of private schools where these schools are making pretty good money on what college baseball players are paying and, you know, what their scholarship doesn't cover. I talked to 2 private school coaches yesterday. Their student athletes were paying a total of $1.4 million and 1.2 million respectively in money to the school. A couple of Power 5 programs that were not private schools were at 420 and $500,000. I mean, that's real money when you talk about how much a college baseball team is paying to an institution to go to school there. That's after scholarships.
And aren't all spring sports, I believe, partial scholarship sports? And so, if I'm not mistaken, and I could be, but that's what I was told. Then every spring sport athlete is generally making money for the university by coming back. And so, if you're in a position where you can pay your seniors a 25% scholarship and they're paying the university 75%, I mean, in a situation where a university is worried about its enrollment numbers, about its retention numbers, maybe there's some benefit to saying, hey, all right, let's pay these seniors because we're still doing okay on this deal.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. There were a couple of smaller schools who actually told me that they have more of a value in these college baseball. There's schools that you would originally think that would kind of be the first to cut baseball, but they actually need these baseball players because they're heavy international schools. Like, who knows what the international landscape is going to be like from a student standpoint in the spring. So their value all of a sudden has been increased by the fact that this is all going on.
And I think that's the balance right here, guys, is that
fellas, I got to bounce.
Burke's got to keep time. Go get it.
Good luck on the
race.
race.
About all those partial scholarships, and he's got 5 kids. He's got to go get a side job.
Mama needs me in the game. It's a little past lunchtime, so I got to hop in the game. See y'all. Let's do it again.
Take care of your teachers.
So here's the point I was going to make is, I don't want to operate as a sport in fear of people dropping the sport. Like, I just think if they're going to do that, they're going to do that. Yeah. But I do think that we trying to find the balance, and this is a really tough needle to thread, is I want to let the Arkansas, who, their revenue in baseball in 2018 was $7 million. Like, we can't impede those programs, but can we be inclusive at the same time? Like, where if the Big West, which is such a beautiful baseball conference, how can we blend this? I think that's the trick. Let's not hold people that want to really get after baseball back, but at the same time, let's not make it so, that Arkansas runs so far down the road that they got no one to play.
I agree. And also I'd be worried about if we got to a point where programs are getting cut. I mean, if there are 30 programs, let's say, that get cut between now and next year because of this crisis, I mean, that's 900 fewer opportunities for players. I mean, it's that simple. It makes the roster worse, and it stinks for the aspiring Division I college baseball player. And a lot of those guys can make something of themselves professionally, and a lot of them can't, but they still have that opportunity, which has, as you guys know, as former players, just that experience has inherent value.
Mm-hmm.
So, any thoughts on this stuff, Kyle?
No, I mean, I think I've kind of said my piece on it. Listen, we were having this discussion internally just about businesses that entered into this thing. And the reality of it is if you were an operating business and you entered into this whole COVID crisis and you were strong, you're probably going to get back to the point that you can be strong. If you were an operating business and entered into this thing and you weren't on solid footing, it may accelerate what was inevitably going to happen to your business. That could very well be the case within our game. It could be some programs that maybe weren't on solid footing or ultimately weren't an ideal spot that this is, it's a convenient opportunity for ADs to make a decision that maybe they wanted to make before. And you have the umbrella of crisis to cover you a little bit. And that would be understandable in some places. I just hope it's as minimal as possible.
Yeah. Hey, I got a final question for you guys. 2021 College World Series. I'm going optimist. We're going to have a fairly normal 2021 season. Are you guys thinking we're going to have more mid-majors, more group of 5 schools in Omaha than normal, or less than normal? So do the big dogs, because of the small draft, the elite teams get even more elite, or do we see more mid-majors in Omaha? What you got?
Runes, that's a tough balance, man, because I think you can look at it 2 ways. Like, there's no doubt the big daddies are going to be better, but I also think we look at the mid-majors, and I kind of always bring this example up, but, you look back at Coastal Carolina championship team, and that team was loaded with, like, seniors and veterans. I think, especially at that mid-major level, man, if you can have a lot of seniors coming back, that's huge, and that's a game changer. So, I would not be surprised, honestly, with either scenario.
But you got to
Well,
pick
I'll tell
one.
you the other
KR.
thing.
That was good. You dumped the question well, but you got to pick one.
That's a very politically correct question, answer there. I'm going to go with more. I'm going to go with more mid-majors. How's that?
Yes,
Yeah.
like
It's a special talent to answer a question and not actually answer it. It's not everybody that can do that.
That was well done, KR.
So you're telling me that I can run for president, KP?
Yeah, well, yeah, you'd fit in. So the only thing that I would add to that is I think the big if is if a one-time transfer is put in.
Yeah.
And if a one-time transfer is put in, that I think it's an immediate positive to the mid-majors this year, because you're going to have a lot of situations that, somebody may be the fourth infielder, fifth infielder, sixth, whatever the number is, but they know they can go start at shortstop at X, whatever it is. So if the one-time transfer comes in, then I would amend. But as it sits right now, I think the power is going to be even more power.
Yeah, fair.
The one-time transfer change, that's not even driven by baseball, right? That's something that it's football and basketball driven, isn't it?
Correct. Yes, it'd be for every sport.
And
which would be total insanity, by the way. But
it would be insanity, but it would blow up the entire APR model. If the APR penalizes teams that have high transfer rates, then you put that rule in for every sport. Why even have an APR anymore? And if you don't have an APR anymore, then we really don't need the 25% scholarship rule, because the whole reason that was put in was to give the students something, more of a commitment from universities, because they're telling them you can't transfer freely. So if you can now transfer freely, everything's changed.
I like it. You're getting fired up. I love this
question.
Well, I'm just saying, if you pull apart that one-time transfer rule, the whole house of cards falls, and the structure. All those rules and regulations we put in place for baseball, they all become pointless. And so, if that happens, I think Kyle's right. I think that the mid-majors will benefit, and it'll be wild, wild west for everybody. But there'll be a lot of players, especially if Major League Baseball reduces the draft in perpetuity. There is going to be more talent in college baseball to go around. And so, yes, those teams at the top will be stronger. They'll still have their pick of the litter, but all you need is the right group of guys at major at the right time, and you can make your run like Kent State did or Stony Brook did. That Stony Brook team, if you recall, was more talented than the LSU team at beat. So that can happen at the level. It really can.
Yeah. Don't you guys think they almost have to do the one-time transfer? Otherwise, this summer we're just going to have this. We're just going to inundate the junior college system with players. I'm with you, Fitzy. Like, the APR has got to get relaxed. The one-time transfer is also interesting. If I understand it correctly, there's only 5 sports that don't have it. They just happen to be high-profile sports. Like softball already has the one-time transfer. They've had it this whole time. It's going to be wild. I don't disagree with that point.
So, Runes, I will add this on softball. The one thing I do not like about softball is there was a player at San Diego State who was, like an All-American caliber player. I have no idea what happened, but she left at holiday break and went and played at UCLA. I do not want to see that.
Yeah, that's a no-go. Can't mid-year transfer eligibility's got to be a no-go. That's what's funny? That's like a drug. It looks good on paper, and then the kid comes, he's super uncomfortable. The team's been working together all fall. It's I use Ian Kinsler as that example. Ian Kinsler transferred to us in January, and it was so unfair to him. He never got comfortable. Pedroia's playing second base next to him, and it was, that is unfair to the kids, I think, actually, to make them eligible in January. I'm with you on that.
I would agree. All right, boys, I love you, but I got to bounce.
Well, let's wrap this thing up, everybody. This was a great discussion. I just want to thank you guys for making the time in your schedule. I hope we get a chance to do this again going forward. We've got time to kill now that there's no baseball, which makes me sad. But we'll get through this. Thank you guys for joining us today. Thanks to all of our readers and viewers for watching. Until next time, so long, everybody.
Bye, guys.
See you, boys.